Hi everyone! Today I'm here to talk about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, or The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or The Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yeah, it goes by so many names. Mine just says Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I think pretty much everyone kind of knows what you're talking about when you're talking about the novella slash book. I'm just going to call it book because that's easier for me to remember, honestly, by Robert Louis Stevenson. So this book came out in 1886, which was surprising to me. I realized Stevenson isn't a writer from our own times or anything like that, but I didn't realize that it was that old, and I just wanted to know how shocking it was to people back in the day. I mean, it sold a lot of copies and people were really eating it up, but I couldn't really find any people from that time reacting to it, if that makes sense. Being like, oh my god, this was so shocking and horrifying and all these different things, you know? So it would be interesting if I had a time machine to go back in time and see how people reacted to literature at that time, because that would be really interesting, because Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to us has become such a normal thing, like something that everyone knows about, and the duality of man, and, you know, us having an evil part in us and a good part in us. But, you know, back then this was a brand new book, and so it wasn't part of the popular culture, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde meant nothing to anyone back then until they read the book. And so that would be fascinating to go back in time and study how literature affected people in the actual time that it came out. That being said, I still love Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I read it a long time ago, probably maybe even more than 10 years ago, and it's still fantastic. I wouldn't say it's like easy to read because it's written in older English, not like really old English, it's impossible to understand, but it's still, you know, you got to pay attention. I'll say you have to pay attention to understand what's actually going on, but I still love it, and I feel bad for Dr. Jekyll in some way because he realized he had lived a good life, you know, and then he realized that there was this part of him that did want to give in to all these vices and these horrible things, and he was like, hey, there's two of me inside of me, and what if I just let the other side out, and experimented with that and gave in to that, not realizing the ramifications and the consequences that would have. And I actually really love that. So there's going to be some spoilers up ahead because I'm going to talk about some stuff that happens in the book. So if you haven't read it, it's only like 80 pages long, and so you could go read it and come back and watch this. I'm sure you could find a free version of it online. Even I like physical books though, so hence why I have a copy of it. But at the end, when you read his confession as Dr. Jekyll writing about what's happened, you realize that Hyde took over, and he had this drug that he was taking that can make him switch back and forth between the two personalities. But once Hyde was suppressed for a couple of months, when he came back, he was raging mad, and then he just started taking over more and more. And that was really fascinating to see how if we give in and don't control ourselves for every urge that we have, it will overtake us, and we will become a different person, and we won't be able to control that unless we actually try. Because to be honest, I think it's probably harder to be a nice, like a legit nice and decent person in this world. It's not like it's ridiculously hard, you know, I know tons of nice people, everyone I work with is nice, but you do have to try to be nice, you know. I work in retail and there's lots of people that come in and annoy me, and I can't just be like, get out, ah, you know, and scream my head off. And so it is a choice to be a nice person as opposed to just giving in to every little whim that you have and saying everything that you think and everything like that. And so it was really interesting to see that being played with in the novel. And then I did feel bad for Dr. Jekyll at the end because he did realize Hyde was taking over, and what I thought was a fantastic addition to the story was his failure to be able to recreate the potion. So he had a salt in his potion that allowed him to turn into Mr. Hyde or back into Dr. Jekyll. And after Hyde overtakes him and he realizes that this is a problem, he tries to recreate the potion again, realizes his salt has gone down, like he's low on his supplies, and he orders other salt from the same place, but it is not the same. and there's something different about it, and he says it's impure, but he realizes towards the end that what must have been in the first salt was an impurity that actually made the potion work in the first place, and now it's not there anymore. And all the salt has been changed or purified differently, or whatever it was that changed the chemical makeup. But in that first batch that actually made the potion usable and made him change, there was an impurity in the salt that he cannot find anymore in the entirety of London to change himself back into Dr. Jekyll. And I actually loved that because, I mean, it just shows that once we take action, we can't really undo it. We don't have time machines. We can't go back in time. And sometimes it's a fluke, and sometimes these things happen. And just imagining if that first batch of salt had been perfect and not impure, he wouldn't have been able to make the potion, and then he can't recreate it at the end to be able to turn back into Dr. Jekyll. And I thought that was such a good and sad, horrible, but fantastic finishing touch that the story put on right at the end, that he realized no matter how hard he tries to suppress Hyde, he won't be able to do it, and he can't turn back into himself. And so, yeah, like, I did feel a bit sad for Dr. Jekyll, even though he did this really, like, you don't think it's dumb at the beginning, but yeah, it was a really dumb thing where he decided to turn into Mr. Hyde, and it just got way out of control, and he couldn't handle it. And I mean, things like that happen all the time in life. We experiment with things, and they, you know, run away from us and get out of control, and we can't handle it. But to see it just portrayed through one man and his struggles to try and control it, I thought was really interesting, touching, and makes you really think about life. So I would definitely suggest Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Also, I'm going to link down below an Arthur song. Like, Arthur the TV show did a fantastic song about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I freaking know all the words. It's a fun, catchy song. It's amazing. I absolutely love it, and you should totally listen to it. So my question for today is, if I could turn into my Mr. Hyde, would I? No. Like, yes, of course, sometimes I want to give in and just, you know, punch people in the head or whatever if they annoy me, but that's why I literally would definitely say no. I would not turn into my version of Mr. Hyde, because I have a really dark imagination, and I'll admit that when people wrong me, I kind of feel like, you know, getting vengeance on them, and I hold grudges, and so it would probably be really, really bad if I turned into my Mr. Hyde, because what I thought was interesting in the book is Dr. Jekyll doesn't really seem to have any enemies, and so when he does become Mr. Hyde, he's basically just attacking random people that piss him off or annoy him or get in his way. And I don't really have any enemies, you know, but like I said, if people would bother me and I suddenly turn into Mr. Hyde, it would probably not be good. So, although it would be interesting, honestly, to see what my bad side of myself would do if I didn't care about anything and no consequences and nothing, and it was just doing whatever I wanted to do, it would be interesting to see. I think it would also be very bad and definitely land me in jail. So, yeah, that was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. If you could see what your evil self would do, would you do it? Answer down below. And also, totally read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Good book. If you like my book reviews, I post them every Friday, so please like and subscribe down below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.